Hi everybody. The lower centers, the lower chakras. What are some of the challenges when approaching this part of the body? The diaphragm down, the solar plexus down, where much of our difficult psychic material, the holding of a lot of great density, is kept within this lower part of the body. When we talk about someone progressing on the ordinary wheel of life, the ordinary man, the mutable cross, the life of the personality, this is a person who is polarized from the solar plexus down, meaning they are operating from body identification, from identification with the form, and the process of awakening or moving more to the solar life is that of opening the heart, often first, and then a gradual awakening of these upper centers, and then eventually a synthesis between the upper and lower, where the lower centers bring that occupancy of, let's say, the feminine energies, of integrity, of instinctuality and oomph that is carried with the form. Though at this point of synthesis, there is a merging with these more subtle planes of consciousness, which are tapped into through the upper centers in particular. So, with that all said, what are some of the challenges when we start meeting this material, and what can be some of the traps, common traps out there in terms of practices that can end up stimulating the lower centers before there's been an adequate development of the heart and the consciousness faculties, and what are some of the dangers that can arise as a result of that? So we're going to look at that today. Given that we are moving into a seventh ray age, it's going to bring the dense energies of the lower centers more into the picture. If we think about the Piscean Age and the jewel of that age, as we've discussed so many times before, it's really the awakening of the heart center which leads to a polarizing up out of the essential holding of body consciousness, which is really kind of sets in the solar plexus for all intents and purposes, simplified, but that's the essence of it. And then with the Mars and Neptunian process, it's an elevation through the devotional quality up into the heart, and that's where we start moving towards a greater principle, something beyond ourselves. We move beyond self-gratification and think about what we can give rather than what we can take from life. So it's a moving into our spiritual center. So that's really the jewel of the Piscean Age. That's the goal of the Abrahamic religions, especially Christianity. Christ rules that process of starting to become obedient to the soul. That is the Christ child. That is the baptism that happens in the heart. So upwards into consciousness, and then down into the lower centers, where the application of love realized through the heart center begins the process of healing and synthesizing and a meeting with these denser energies, which eventually will have to be dealt with. So the trap with the religious people, the fanatics, or those who are really devoted to Christ in the more dogmatic religious sense, is that often these people can go through a baptism where they're elevated out of hell, because that's essentially what's happening. You're getting elevated out of the astral, complete identification with the astral realm, and then you touch heaven basically, because the heart is a kind of spiritual central baseline. Oh, we move into the heart. Oh, I'm like free from my anxiety and depression, and now these are some of the things that people say when they go through these mystical religious openings. However, it doesn't mean that that material that made you depressed or anxious isn't there still, because angles of that are still there, but they're just down deep within the lower centers, within the unconscious, the subconscious. But we know you're kind of up in the heart, and so, oh yeah, things are nice and good up here. But necessarily, if we're working with a more mature and comprehensive and dedicated full immersion with the solar path, and with the need to really serve humanity with intentionality, then that necessarily brings us into having to work through more of these problems. So there's a going up, and then there's a going back down. And so when we talk about feminine processes, or incarnating love into the ground, or heaven on earth, which is very much a seventh ray motif there, because we're bringing the upper planes into the lower. That's very Uranian. That's a seventh ray quality there. Okay, so necessarily bringing things down, the descending, bringing the involutionary wisdom is part of the epoch that we're moving into. However, I have seen many instances of people who will, or teachings, let's say, that will say something similar to what I just said, but they approach these involutionary methods without having first properly worked with the heart and awakened the heart. And this is where it becomes dangerous, because when you don't have the centrality of the heart, and when you don't have the gradual development of things that come with the heart realization, which is the self-knowledge of the soul, the solar self, the me, which is beyond the personality, if you don't have the revelation of love as the fundamental pulsing essence of our essential nature as consciousness, without these things, quite frankly, we do not have the resources to be able to properly deal with the lower material. Love synthesizes, love heals. Without the revelation of love, and not love from emotional attachment, because that's solar plexus down. It's like me and my family. It's based on the personal connection. Without a revelation of universal love, if we start stimulating the lower centers, it ends up magnifying the lower self with all of its fragments. And this is where we can see some of the New Age traps, or some of the Tantra traps, where you have people doing so-called tantric teachings, but then behind the scenes the teachers are sleeping with students, or there's home wrecking going on, and all of this nonsense where it's really not a display of wisdom and not a display of love. And it's almost the shadow, we could call it the shadow feminine qualities of the manipulation of Shakti, which isn't a quality of the feminine in and of itself. It's a shadow third ray, let's say, of the three major rays, because the ray 3 is substance and intelligence, and the shadow of that is manipulation and the spider web, and that which deceives through manipulation, something like that. So when we bring love into the picture, and this is what the function of Christ is, or bringing that vertical axis into being, is that we have now the need to be obedient to the love principle. And that theme of obedience and humility are very strong pillars of, let's say, the Christian teaching. And I give my life to Christ. That is, I give my life to the unfolding of the love principle, and I make the necessary sacrifices in order to align with that love principle. And that means I have to approach parts of myself that are moving from a purely selfish point of view in a way that means to crucify that. You have to bear the cross of the crucifixion of that selfishness. And what eventually happens is, I have a selfish desire. Okay, I choose to not move with that and move with love instead. And eventually, the incarnation of the love goes down. This is why we need to develop a strong heart, because the more heart energy you have, the more you have to apply downward. This is a sutratmic energy. It's like the actual force of love that begins to move through the etheric body. You have more love to apply downward, and that starts to reveal the true sources of pain and really that which is moving under our selfishness. Because wherever there's a selfishness, that's some sort of will to power, and will to power exists where the love principle isn't. So wherever we don't have love in our system, there's something that will manipulate to get love. Or at least an idea of love, or something that will manipulate to have control over, because that desire to have control over, or to dominate, or to manipulate, or get something out of the environment, which we all have angles of, by the way, whether it's expressing more in a malevolent way or just like a neediness, but it's still a manipulation, right? So wherever that's going on, a lack of love is operating somewhere. So what can happen is sometimes when people do activities that stimulate these lower centers, and they can be some practices of yoga, not all, because of course fundamentally it's stretching, but there can be some breathing exercises and yogic exercises that can start really opening up these lower centers, and they can move a lot of the dense pranic energy through your system. And some people can have really beneficial experience to that, where there's an opening and a flow of energy that can bring more, the subtle nadis can bring into alignment. So sometimes it's good. Other times it activates those power centers when all of that energy starts to move through those fragmented aspects of the lower self. And so you get this magnification of the lesser self. And that's where it becomes dangerous. We even see a version of this happen with lottery winners. We hear this a lot, right? The phenomenon of people who win all these millions of dollars and then their lives get progressively worse. Why? Because money is a dense subject matter. It's a seventh ray subject matter, by the way. So having a lot of money is equivalent to a lot of dense energy, which can make you do a lot of things. But that's equivalent to having like a lot of sexual energy that you can't manage. It's a similar thing. Sex and money, seventh ray subject matter. So people can get all this money and then stuff goes wrong in their life. But really what's happening is that all of this dense energy is bringing a magnification of these things which were either latent in the psyche or kind of just expressing in much smaller and narrower ways. And now we're bringing all this energy into the system and it's like really... So to whatever extent we say the lower three centers are the magnetic potency that ends up being able to manifest, because that's really what it's about. It's manifesting energies at the dense level, because it's the lower three realms of the mental, astral, physical, and that's where manifestation is anchored into it, and it creates. It's the feminine creation of being. It's similar, as above, so below, with the sperm versus the egg. So the female process does a lot of the work in terms of actually creating the form, but the sperm, and in this case the sperm is reflective of the principle of spirit or consciousness, right? That stimulates the process. So the question is then, what's being created within the realm of the feminine if there isn't a seed of consciousness there? And that is all of the lower aspects of the self, and that's where it's the manipulation or the shadowy stuff, and we have all the disaster that we see everywhere, basically. So the seed of consciousness starts here. The maturation of love starts here. Selflessness, compassion, humility, all of these things, as well as the maturation steadily of mind. Because remember, the second ray is love, wisdom. So also that the processes of wisdom. This is why the second ray is a ray of synthesis and healing. Healers and teachers are on the second ray, of course. And what do these kinds of people do? They help reveal processes and methodologies for bringing things all together. So we say the true function of the even ray line of manifestation 2, 4, and 6 is really about processes and developing a proper understanding of how to work with the strong energies that come on the odd ray line of manifestation, that is 1, 3, 5, 7, because they're the will energies. We can't, they're coming in no matter what, okay? There's oomph coming through there, but if we are unconscious or fragmented in terms of our responsiveness, this is where we come into disarray. So the function of people on rays 2, 4, and 6 are really to help bring about better processes of healing, of education, of psychological understanding, so that we can bring the human being into alignment. And again, why the second ray is the ray of the teachers, that sensitivity to all these little bits and pieces that can come with that second ray is what attunes that second ray person to sensing the connections between all those different types of forces, which is what a teacher needs to be able to do if they are to educate effectively, right? Okay, so it's a little side tangent. But just in terms of love, wisdom, so it's the love quality, the desire to bring things into a place of unity and goodness, essentially, versus intelligence, which is the bright processes of inquiry and, okay, what is this going on in myself and why is this here? Because if we take the second ray as a ray of all-inclusiveness, we necessarily need to include the dark material, the shadow material, but it's not the same. Including something isn't the same as letting something run rampant. So you get a bunch of sexual energy and you, oh yeah, I just want to, be animalistic and wild and have all this sex. It's like, that's not really inclusive, because especially with these things, they're rising what is essentially from a place of pain somewhere, but we have to dig deeper underneath that which is riding out of the identity that's built out of the separation. That thing you have to kill, because that's riding from separation. So if we are to include it, we have to kill off the egocentric expression of it and get to the source of it, because that's what we actually need to include, love, and synthesize. Right? So that's the true and false thing. That's why the relativism, danger, solipsistic thing with the New Age movement is such a problem. Because we go, okay, I'm including everything, but there's no differentiation between what it is that's moving within yourself. So like, yeah, I'm all inclusive. No, you're not. No, you're not. You're encouraging your own fragmentation. So I see mystery schools, for instance, that take a lot of what I've just said in terms of the stuff with the lower centers, like, yeah, okay, the feminine, and we need to embrace the lower centers, but they do not emphasize the importance of love, humility, of obedience to the love principle, and they can let people in to do these exercises or whatever, or these activities where you get all these people together and you do all these cathartic emotional release processes, but there isn't an equal level of the maturity of consciousness or the responsibility of love in that equation. And this is where it becomes it's a funny thing, because these spaces often pride themselves on being really pro-feminine, but to the degree that the love principle isn't strong, it becomes a sort of egocentric, weird, almost a masculine perversion of the feminine, where it's like you take an idea of, we got to go into the lower centers, but you kind of impose that onto yourself through these practices, rather than what is my experience, my husband's experience. When you deeply go into the heart and you work with the principle of consciousness and you surrender to the soul fully, the unconscious, as the deeper feminine processes, they reveal themselves to you as a spiraling, unfolding naturally, relative to the maturity and capacity of your consciousness. That is to say that you don't have to activate these feminine processes of lower chakra work. They open naturally as a result of the maturation of consciousness. And that is the true mystery of the feminine, because she opens and is responsive to the love quality. And this is quite poignant because we're in Virgo season, the Pisces-Virgo axis. Pisces, the sign of the Christ, the sign of the Father. The Father into virgin matter stimulates the wisdom processes. But what's happening is that people are trying to facilitate or co-opt the feminine processes from the point of view of like, okay, we're going to do a feminine process. No, it happens naturally through the unfolding of that instinctual wisdom of her through you. So another way to say this too is that before you can really surrender and lose control into, because the feminine way is very much like we have to drop into feminine processes like this, and this is very hard for the Westerners, and we have a very negative mother problem that's part of our thousands and thousands of years inheritance, okay? How cut off we are from nature, what we think is normal in our modern life of busy running around, and all of our feet problems and anxiety and depression. A lot of this is root chakra stuff, very dense and difficult to access. But lost my train of thought. I'm really tired today. So before you can surrender and really drop the control into her, we need to first gain control through the application of love. So that is when we're tempering down the lesser self, which is doing all of its ping-ponging from a place of its fragmentation. We have to bring things in. That's why the early phases of the mystical process, or during these very intimate, vulnerable stages of the early unfolding, there is often a degree of quietening down and isolation, and having to really tread quite slowly and steadily. It's just a universal thing that people go through at some point. There's something you need to pull back. So we have to gain control, in other words, before we can lose control. So with all that said, I want to be clear that it's not that there aren't processes that you can do or practices that you can do. It's that, which seems like a contradiction of what I just said. It's more about the way we're approaching it. So it's one thing to develop a meditation or a yoga technique because I'm trying to open my feminine or open my kundalini, versus I'm working with the love principle. Oh, something from the unconscious is rising and it's a big pain in the belly or shame or something, and then applying a meditative or presencing technique just in response to what's opening. So it's not that there aren't things that we do. There's meditation, there's stretching, there's practices, most certainly, but it's about allowing the intelligence of the how, that's the feminine intelligence of the how, to reveal that pathway to you as a result of that, the communication with the unconscious and all of that which is developed as part of the great evolutionary process of matter itself. The feminine is the wisdom principle. It's that saying of the masculine knows what to do but not how to do it, whereas the feminine knows how to do it but not necessarily what to do, which is why the feminine is that creative process, the unfolding of all the intelligence. That's very third ray, right? So that's just what I see with a lot of these places that are going, yeah, pro-feminine, we're doing lower chakra work and that's what's needed on the planet, but they're doing it from a place of a kind of framework, even though it doesn't necessarily seem like it from the outset, but there's something slightly perverted or off in the approach where they're doing all these things to activate the feminine rather than seeing that consciousness activates her. Consciousness stimulates the Virgo processes of wisdom. So it's about that development of humility and of love, and the deeper you cultivate love, that's the deeper part of you. Love really wants to love her. The masculine wants to love her. So the deeper you have a revelation of love, the more you'll naturally go into her. This is the real seventh ray tantra work here. This is, I must merge with her. I must bring everything into unity. There's no part of her that I will not love. And that's the Persephone wisdom. There's a part of that feminine mystery which only responds to that. So you can do all of these different practices and all of this hoopla, but there's a part of her secret mystery that will always stay hidden to you until your consciousness is really there, and you can't fake that. You can't do a hopscotch breath work, stretching, yoga, kundalini activation process that's going to make that happen. It's a kind of arrogance and a dismissal against the intelligence of the feminine when we have that. And it's also a rejection of, to whatever degree we say love as consciousness is the masculine component, it's to some degree a rejection of him too. And that's what the religious people get at with the idea of the rejection of Christ or something. People do not accept the truth because consciousness as the pure truth, the objective truth, love as a cosmic living principle. That's the surrender to the God, the surrender to the Christ, to the soul, to the monad, and to the need to ascend. And then from that place of knowing who we are as consciousness, then bringing that down. And then we start to work with the deeper processes of Eros and that which really fashions the individual. It's a bit of the Taurus quality there. Taurus and Virgo, earth signs, and then the psychic signs, the water signs, they're all those alchemical feminine processes of incarnating the love principle and fashioning and emerging and tearing you up and spitting you out and having to go through all of those death processes and meet the grief and the rage and the all-embracing component of what we might say is a feminine approach, that quality of all inclusion. But really, that process is defined by a capacity to go up here and then go back down, and we can't actually get down without going up. So when that makes sense, right? Because that actually in that reveals that there is no separation between the up and the down. Okay, I think that's the essence of my rant today. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you soon.